approximately 8.2 million people received an email on Tuesday morning that they hadn't signed up for. And it wasn't your typical marketing email from some kind of travel agency or somebody offering you a buy one, get one free deal on a pair of shoes. It was a marketing email announcing the presidential campaign of Tom Steyer, who is the billionaire maven from San Francisco, who this week announced that he's running for president. And why do I mention this email? Well, because Tom Steyer has spent the better part of the last 2.5 years running around advocating for the impeachment of Donald Trump. That has been his signature issue by far for the past 2.5 years, or approximately since the time that Trump won the 2016 election. Now, prior to that, Tom Steyer was all about climate change and so forth, despite his involvement in the fossil fuel industry, which is a bit incongruous, but at least it's somewhat recognizably political in a standard sense. But the impeachment stuff always had a little bit of a different tinge to it, because it's not as if that was your generic political issue that you might want to bring extra attention to. It was very specific, and it was very coordinated, and it was very emotionalistic in the sense that Tom Steyer did recognize that there was a segment within the populace that was craving somebody to get out in front of the impeachment issue early and aggressively. So that's what Tom Steyer did. In October of 2017, he launched his organization Need to Impeach and began running ads that conspicuously featured Tom Steyer himself solemnly intoning at the camera and saying, "We must impeach Trump or else the Republic will crumble tomorrow," or whatever. So this led to a raft of speculation that Tom Steyer was going to run for president. And earlier this year, he went to Iowa, which seemed like it probably could portend an announcement of a presidential campaign. But instead, Tom Steyer announced that he was not running. And it was around that time that the impeachment issue actually began to pick up a lot of steam in the populace. Elizabeth Warren got a significant uptick in the polls after she became the first high-profile presidential candidate to demand that impeachment proceedings be initiated after the Mueller report was issued. So that seemed like a valid tactic on her part politically, or at least an advantageous tactic, because now Warren is in the top tier of contention, or so it would seem if you at least believe the polls. So Steyer continued going around the country holding town halls, dispatching his personnel to different states. I was in South Carolina just last month for the South Carolina State Democratic Convention, where virtually all the candidates showed up. And Need to Impeach had a big booth there where they were handing out impeachment-related paraphernalia, of course. They were also collecting email addresses, and other contact information. And that led Steyer to amass an incredibly formidable email list. 8.2 million as of now that we know of. And then all of a sudden, after spending 2.5 years saying that impeachment was his primary goal, devoting millions of dollars to ostensibly advocating impeachment, but actually gathering a huge amount of data on potential voters, Tom Steyer, all of a sudden this week, announces that he's running for president. And where does that announcement land? In the inboxes of people who signed up not to support the Tom Steyer 2020 presidential campaign, but to get updates on this Need to Impeach initiative. So it seems like a little bit of a bait and switch, doesn't it? Because it would be one thing if Steyer was overt in making known that he was going to use this data collection scheme as a vehicle to bolster his political standing and therefore lead to a presidential run down the line, but that was never really made clear. People speculated it, like I mentioned, but he disowned that prospect earlier this year. So he was essentially, I would contend, encouraging people to sign up for his email list, which is extremely valuable. I mean, there's no more prized commodity virtually than to have a large email list, because you can constantly use it for soliciting donations. And you can use it for other organizational purposes. Bernie Sanders raises a ton of money, largely on the strength of his email list, which is massive. But Tom Steyer had a goal, a political goal that he presented that had nothing to do necessarily with the presidential campaign. It was all about impeaching Trump. So he got people essentially, again, I would contend, to sign up for that email list under false pretenses, because it was later used for an explicitly electoral end, which is burgeoning Tom Steyer's somewhat misbegotten presidential campaign, which he woke up one day, apparently, in the past week or so, and decided to launch. Now, is it legal? I think it's actually an open question. Probably it is legal, even if it's somewhat corrupt and sleazy and deceptive. But nonetheless, I think it warrants further scrutiny because, I don't know, you could make potentially a fraud argument, I would think, on the basis of deceptive advertising. Look at what Mother Jones reported this week, which is that they claim, meaning Need to Impeach, the organization that Tom Steyer founded, they claim that Tom Steyer is technically renting the email list from Need to Impeach, which is an organization that he started and funded. So he's renting it from himself? Does that mean Tom Steyer is effectively paying himself for the email list? How does that work legally? I mean, I think there's actually some probing there to be done, and I'm going to be looking into it. I wrote a piece for The Spectator that came out today, which of course I'll link to, which goes into this to a cursory extent, meaning I don't delve into the specific legality in great detail, but I will in the days and weeks ahead. And we shall see how it all pans out. But anyway, read that piece. I actually think that the most obvious beneficiary from Tom Steyer inexplicably entering the race could be Bernie Sanders, because it actually sharpens the contrast between Bernie and the other candidates, given that Bernie obviously has a very strong anti-oligarch message. So for a billionaire, a bona fide billionaire, to enter the race, it gives Bernie a foil that he can position against. It's almost like if Mike Bloomberg had entered the race, but it's a version of Mike Bloomberg who is somehow even more disconnected from reality. So that would be my initial assessment as to the impact of this. But then again, you can't really write anything off necessarily, because Tom Steyer is saying he's going to spend at least $100 million of his own money on the presidential race. So he blankets the TV airways, and who knows what could happen. I don't think it's a very good chance that he makes any traction, really. But crazier things have happened. Look who's in the White House now. But it's also led to the really ridiculous scenario of Tom Steyer using this massive email list to solicit donations of $1 from the recipients of the email. Meanwhile, he's saying he's going to spend $100 million of his own money. So think about that. On the one hand, you're saying, I have all this limitless resources to wage this campaign on my own dime, but you still have to give me $1 so he can qualify for the debates per the criteria that have been laid out by the DNC. It's so manifestly silly, but such are the times we live in. So that'll do it for now, and I will speak to you later.